song that reminded us of a day, a special day that took place 2,000 years ago. We will be talking about a day also, a special day that is taking place right now at the present time. But before we go on, I invite you to bow your heads as we have a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we ask the Lord at this time in a special way that our minds will be opened as we read and understand this special day of atonement. Give us wisdom from on high, Lord, and open up our minds. And we thank you, Lord, for this special message that you have given us to prepare us for the soon coming. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. Last Thursday was Thanksgiving, a special day for us. But you know, Thanksgiving usually doesn't mean anything to us until we understand fully what it's all about, until we dig into the details of what Thanksgiving is about. And this is what I did. I did some research about Thanksgiving. So the Thanksgiving holiday's history in North America is rooted in English traditions dating from the Protestant Reformation. It also has aspects of a harvest festival. Pilgrims and Puritans who emigrated from England in the 1620s and 1630s carried the tradition of days of fasting and days of Thanksgiving with them to New England. Several days of Thanksgiving were held in early New England history that had been identified as the first Thanksgiving. I thought that there was only one first Thanksgiving, but apparently there are several first Thanksgivings, including the Pilgrim holidays in Plymouth in 1621 and 1623, and a Puritan holiday in Boston in 1631. The 1621 Plymouth Feast and Thanksgiving was prompted by a good harvest, which the Pilgrims celebrated with Native Americans, who helped them get through the previous winter by giving them food in that time of scarcity. Then the President of the United States, George Washington, proclaimed the first nationwide Thanksgiving celebration in America, marking November 26, 1789, as a day of public thanksgiving and prayer, to be observed by acknowledging with grateful hearts the many and signal favors of Almighty God. Thanksgiving in the United States was observed on various dates throughout history, from the time of the Founding Fathers until the time of Lincoln. The date Thanksgiving was observed varied from state to state. Modern Thanksgiving was officially called for in all states in 1863 by a presidential proclamation of Abraham Lincoln. Now, as Seventh-day Adventists, as Christians, should we condemn the observing of this holiday because of a possible pagan background of a harvest festival? What does the Spirit of Prophecy say about this? Well, let's find out. It says here, our birthday anniversaries and Christmas and Thanksgiving festivals are too often devoted to selfish gratification. when the mind should be directed to the mercy and loving kindness of God. God is displeased that His goodness, His constant care, His unceasing love are not brought to mind on these anniversary occasions. So apparently there is no direct condemnation of observing these special days. Birthdays, Christmas, and Thanksgiving are mentioned. But there is counsel to direct our minds and the minds of others towards God, towards His goodness and unceasing love on these days. The Bible talks about a day God has appointed, and the whole world cannot avoid this day. It is called a day of the coming of the Son of Man. What is this day? We have a day of giving thanks to God, but God has a day for us. What is this day about? Let us read some Bible texts about this day. Daniel 7:13. It says, I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Another text, Malachi chapter 3, verse 1. Behold, I will send my messenger, and he shall prepare the way before me, and the Lord whom ye seek shall suddenly come to his temple, even the messenger of the covenant whom ye delight in. Behold, he shall come, saith the Lord of hosts. But who may abide the day of his coming? And who shall stand when he appeareth? For he is like a refiner's fire, and like fuller's soap. So what is this? What are these texts referring to? Is it referring to the second coming of Christ? The coming of the Son of Man? Let us read one more text. Matthew 25, verse 13. Watch therefore, for ye know neither the day nor the hour, wherein the Son of Man cometh. It sounds so familiar. We read this text so many times in the Bible. But I would like to share with you some information. There are several other texts that are referring to the coming of the Son of Man. But what does this really mean? Is this talking about the second coming of Christ in the clouds of heaven? We have special insight on this. Listen carefully. The coming of Christ as our high priest to the most holy place for the cleansing of the sanctuary brought to view in Daniel 8:14. The coming of the Son of Man to the Ancient of Days as presented in Daniel 7:13. And the coming of the Lord to his temple foretold by Malachi are descriptions of the same event. And this is also represented by the coming of the bridegroom to the marriage described by Christ in the parable of the 10 virgins of Matthew 25. So we find out that all these descriptions of the coming of the Son of Man are all describing one event. And what is this event, according to this passage? It is the coming of Christ as our high priest to the most holy place. This doesn't sound like the second coming, does it? It is the coming of Christ to the most holy place. The spirit of prophecy verifies that these texts about the coming of Christ are pointing to the cleansing of the sanctuary, the antitypical Day of Atonement. But you may ask, are there not Bible texts that refer to the coming of Christ as his literal coming? Are all texts referring to the coming of Christ talking about the Day of Atonement? Well, let's read some texts. Jude 14, and there's only one chapter, verses 14 and 15. And Enoch, also the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000 of his saints to execute judgment upon all, and to convince all that there are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds which they have ungodly committed, and of all their hard speeches which ungodly sinners have spoken against them. So Jude 14 and 15 clearly refers to the literal coming of Christ with 10,000 of his saints. The spirit of prophecy acknowledges this in Great Controversy 4:26. It says, This coming, referring to Jude 14 and 15, and the coming of the Lord to his temple are distinct and separate events. So they are distinct and separate events. So the Day of Atonement is a distinct and separate event from the literal second coming of Christ, even though they are both called the coming of the Son of Man. Allow me to share with you what takes place on this Day of Atonement. What is this Day of Atonement? And what happens on that day? Here is a brief description of the Day of Atonement based on Leviticus 16. The ancient writings from the Old Testament of the book of Exodus tells us that God directed Moses to build a tabernacle so he could dwell among his people. Following specific instructions given by God, the tabernacle was completed at the center of the encampment. A cloud hovered over the tabernacle by day, and a pillar of fire by night, showing God's presence. In addition to the construction details, God also gave commandments concerning the regular sacrifices and offerings to be made in the tabernacle. Among these commandments, the Lord set aside a special day each year when the high priest would make a sacrifice to atone for or cover the sins of the nation of Israel. This solemn day was called the Day of Atonement. The Day of Atonement, called in Hebrew Yom HaKippur, was considered to be the most holy day of the Hebrew calendar. It was a day when atonement was made for the sins of the priests, the people, and the cleansing of the tabernacle. Preparations began early in the day, on the Day of Atonement. Everything needed to be ready at hand, since the special ceremony was carried out by the high priest alone. On all other days, the high priest wore his full ceremonial dress, made up of 8 separate pieces of clothing, which distinguished him from other priests. But on the Day of Atonement, he removed the decorated clothing and wore only the 4 white linen garments of a priest. This expression of humility further illustrated the fact that this day was different. When the high priest was ready to officiate, everyone, including the other priests, left the tabernacle and courtyard area. The people realized that for the whole nation of Israel to receive the benefits of the ceremony, it had to be performed by the highest anointed individual and him alone. Although the people were not permitted to enter the tabernacle courtyard, they gathered at the gate to catch a glimpse of what is happening. There was a certain anticipation in the air on this Day of Atonement. It marked a new beginning for each person whose past sins were forgiven with the shedding of blood of the sacrifice. The Day of Atonement ceremony was carried with care and precision. Each aspect was performed with the utmost reverence, according to God's specific instructions. The washing of both the hands and the feet, illustrating spiritual cleansing, was commanded by God. The spiritual and physical cleansing was repeated several times throughout the day. Once cleansed, the high priest went to the gate to see the animals required for the sacrifices: a bullock, 2 goats, and a ram. These animals were special carefully selected for their healthy and unblemished condition. While today it may seem a cruel concept to use a fine animal for a sacrifice, this is clearly what God prescribed and commanded. Blood sacrifices illustrated a key principle which God wanted his people to understand. He surely created these particular animals for this important purpose. Two nearly identical sacrifice rituals were performed one after the other. The first was a bullock to make atonement for the sins of the high priest and the priesthood. The second was one for the goats to make atonement for the sins of the whole nation. Blood from the animal was caught in a copper bowl and set aside to be used for sprinkling and pouring in the ceremony. After the blood was collected, re-cleansing of the laver was required. So we see that cleansing is a regular part in the Day of Atonement. The high priest would then take hot coals from the brazen altar and place among the incense altar in the holy place. So the next step would be for the high priest to go in the holy place and place the hot coals on the altar of incense. The sweet aroma from the burning incense, representing the prayers of the nation of Israel, filled the air and rose upward as the high priest offered prayers to God. The high priest would have recited several selections from a collection of 18 ancient prayers, such as, "Hear our voice, O Lord our God, and spare us, and show mercy upon us, and accept in mercy and in grace our prayer. For thou art the God who hearest prayer and supplication. Let us not return empty, O our King, from before thy face. For thou, Lord, in mercy hearest the prayers of thy people Israel. Blessed be the Lord who heareth prayer." Hearing the high priest praying, the people would join their hearts in prayer, asking God to forgive their sins and accept the atonement sacrifice. "Forgive us, Father, for we have sinned. Pardon us, our King, for we have transgressed. For thou pardonest and forgivest. Blessed be the gracious Lord who multiplieth forgiveness." After cleansing again of the laver, the most critical part of the ceremony began. Utilizing the blood caught in the copper bowl, the high priest entered the most holy place, the Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies was the chamber of the tabernacle, where the Shekinah glory of God dwelt. Entering this area during the ceremony was a fearsome responsibility. Inside the Holy of Holies, the high priest sprinkled the blood upward, once on the mercy seat, and then 7 times before the Ark of the Covenant. He then left the Holy of Holies by backing out, never turning around, and never looking directly at the Ark of the mercy seat. Since the high priest had removed his garments with the bells, the people waited anxiously outside, not knowing whether the sacrifice was accepted or even if the high priest was still alive. When he finally emerged in the outer court, the people would have undoubtedly rejoiced to see him. After re-cleansing at the laver, the high priest entered the holy place and sprinkled the blood upward once onto the curtain or veil that separated the chambers, and then 7 times on the ground before it. The high priest would then exit the holy place and re-cleanse at the laver. After combining the blood of the bullock and goat, he sprinkled the blood of the horns of the altar. The next stage of the ceremony was to illustrate how God viewed the sins of the nation, now that the sacrifice had been accepted. By placing his hands on the head of the living goat, the high priest would impute or transfer the sins of the nation to the goat. The goat, bearing the sin and the judgment of the nation, was then led out of the camp into the wilderness, and it was customary for the people to jeer at the goat as it was led away. In fact, the term scapegoat comes from the sanctuary ritual. So now we see a little glimpse of the Day of Atonement in the sanctuary service. This typical Day of Atonement teaches us what will take place in the antitypical Day of Atonement, or the most holy place in the heavenly sanctuary. The Day of Atonement is also included in the parable of Jesus, in the parable of the 10 virgins in Matthew 25. Christ and his disciples were looking upon a scene during the sunset hour of a house, or the bride's house, lighted up with activity in the valley below. The festive scene was in preparation for a marriage procession during a wedding. They were waiting for the bridegroom to appear so that the bridegroom can accompany the bride from the bride's house to the bridegroom's house, where the wedding and the feast will take place. After an apparent delay and midnight cry, the procession takes place towards the bridegroom's house. But only the wise virgins were allowed to go in. This makes you think, the midnight cry. A lot of people believe that the midnight cry is of the second coming of Christ. But no, that's not when it took place. We are told that it took place in 1844. The midnight cry was 1844. Later on, we will find out what the second coming of Christ really means. Let us read from the Great Controversy, 426 and 47. In the parable, when the bridegroom came, they that were ready went in with him to the marriage. The coming of the bridegroom here, brought to you, takes place before the marriage. In other words, it doesn't take place after the marriage. The coming of the Son of Man takes place before the marriage. The marriage represents the reception by Christ of his kingdom, the holy city, the New Jerusalem, which is the capital and representative of his kingdom. It is called the bride, the Lamb's wife. Clearly then, the bride represents the holy city, and the virgins that go out to meet the bridegroom are a symbol of the church. In the Revelation, the people of God are said to be the guests at the marriage supper of Revelation 19:9. If guests, they cannot be represented also as the bride. So you notice that the coming of the bridegroom takes place before the marriage. And also the bride represents the holy city of the New Jerusalem, and the virgins represent the church. If the virgins represent the church, then there are foolish members in the church, as well as wise members. And not everybody will go in. The wise virgins are only allowed to enter into the marriage feast. Now, this is where the rubber meets the road. In the typical Day of Atonement, the people of Israel were commanded to afflict their souls as the high priest enters into the most holy place. Leviticus 16:31 says, "It shall be a Sabbath of rest unto you, and ye shall afflict your souls by a statute for rest unto you forever." And the antitypical Day of Atonement, God's people are called to afflict their souls or to search their souls for any sin remaining. That's what it means for us today, as we enter into the most holy place through Christ by faith. This is righteousness by faith, seen in the sanctuary service, and understood only under the third angel's message after 1844. Nobody quite understood this before 1844, but it was only understood after 1844 when God revealed this truth to our pioneers. This is such a powerful truth that only the Seventh-day Adventists understand, and we are obligated to share it to the world. But will the whole world be placed under the investigative judgment at the Day of Atonement? Will everybody's cases be considered at this time? Listen to this. So in the great day of final atonement and investigative judgment, the only cases considered are those of the professed people of God. What a sobering statement for those who are the professed people of God. But it makes a lot of sense because in the typical service, only those who have come before God with confession and repentance and whose sins through the blood of the sin offering were transferred to the sanctuary had a part in the service of the Day of Atonement. The parable of the 10 virgins teaches this principle. The parable of the wedding feast in Matthew 22 also teaches this principle. Only those who were invited and came had a part in the wedding feast. And it is only the professed people of God who will vindicate God's character in the end of this great controversy. What powerful lessons we learn from the Day of Atonement. So how do we be a part of this antitypical service in the heavenly sanctuary? How does this work? Let's read again. They that were ready went in with him to the marriage, and the door was shut. They were not to be present in person at the marriage, for it takes place in heaven, while they are upon the earth. The followers of Christ are to wait for their Lord when he will return from the wedding. Luke 12:36. But they are to understand his word and to follow him by faith as he goes in before God. It is in this sense that they are said to go into the marriage. Apparently, we don't have to be present in person to join the wedding ceremony. We just have to understand his word and to follow him by faith into the marriage as we afflict our souls. A correct understanding of the Day of Atonement will help us understand also the day of Christ's return. The Bible tells us about this, the day of Christ's return. Luke 12:36. And ye yourselves, like unto men that wait for their Lord, when he will return from the wedding, that when he cometh and knocketh, they may open unto him immediately. So Christ hasn't returned yet. But before his return, there will be a wedding, which is taking place right now in the heavenly sanctuary. When does Christ come? This text tells us that he will come after the wedding, brothers and sisters. A wedding ceremony is taking place in the heavenly sanctuary right now. And any of you entered in just like the wise virgins? Have any of you afflicted your soul or searched your soul of any sin that needs to be confessed of or repented of? I would like to share with you a story. As I was driving last week in the rain. It was a long trip, and I was listening to the radio. And an evangelical pastor was giving a message about a topic about being saved. And since he was evangelical, he was teaching about once saved, always saved. And a question was asked by a caller when we got to the end of the sermon. There was a question and answer. A caller asked, Pastor, since we are once saved, always saved, why do I need to repent? Or do I need to ask forgiveness and confess my sins? And I thought to myself, man, that's a good question. If you're already saved, why do you have to repent? Why do you have to confess? And so the pastor's answer, he started to get into an explanation how when God saves us, nobody can pluck us out of his hands. No one, because we are already saved. And he was also saying how when we are saved, we will not commit sin. And that if we commit sin, that is an indication that we are not saved. So he didn't give his explanation. But the caller said, I accepted Jesus Christ into my life. Am I not saved? Pastor said, yes, you are saved. But the caller said, but I have committed sin. I have committed sin. What shall I do? Shall I confess my sin? Shall I repent? And the pastor's answer was really shocking. Because I was driving. When I heard his answer, I almost swerved the car. He said, no, you don't have to confess. You don't have to repent. Because when you accepted Christ in your life, you only repent once. And that is enough to cover all. And I was shocked by that answer. He was a soul who was wanting to repent of his sins, and he was being denied them. What a sad thought. People are out there realizing the sinfulness of their condition, and they are being denied the opportunity to repent of their sins. You know, Satan is working hard. Satan is doing his best to destroy God's work. Satan knows that a day of test is coming. The National Sunday Law. Just like the day of Thanksgiving, the day of Atonement, there is a day when the National Sunday Law will take place. He knows that God's people are confident that they know about the true day of worship if he could just keep them from afflicting their souls. You know, this is a very important part of the Day of Atonement, afflicting your souls. His mission will be accomplished if he can keep us from afflicting our souls. The call at this time is not only to accept Christ as your personal Savior, but I would like to add one thing more to this call. Will you live a life according to God's will? To live a life that is sinless. We should strive to be sinless, brothers and sisters. Christ wants to return from the wedding, but he still has a work to do in the heavenly sanctuary, pleading for our behalf before the Father to blot out our sins. It is my prayer that each of us will live a changed life, a holy life with God's help, for we are in the Day of Atonement. Let us enter in. and body be preserved blameless unto the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. Faithful is he that calleth you, who also will do it.